Okay. So if people
Okay.
can put in the chat where they're from, and thank you for coming. I don't know how many of you have vacation this week. And for those of you who don't have vacation, I don't know how many of you are having the weather we're having in Boston right now, which is it's 70 degrees. And we're expected to get 6 inches of snow on Friday. So crazy, but thank you so much for coming. And this is going to be a more informal than usual because I'm really just going to take you to the site and we're going to talk about it. But Christine, you're starting, I think. So go.
Yes, well, I want to say just a couple of words about Sharon. I've known Sharon, fortunately, for many, many years. I actually first came to know Sharon when she was teaching AP statistics and when she was an Einstein Fellow. And all I can say is I've learned so much from Sharon over the years and feel very fortunate that I have her as a colleague and a friend. Back in 2017, ASA and the New York Times began a collaborative effort, which is now known as What's Going On in This Graph. And Sharon was the mastermind behind this. And since 2017, she's been the curator, the writer, as well as the main moderator for What's Going On with This Graph. It's been a tremendous success. I think it started out once a month, and then now it has moved to every week during the school year. So Sharon was gracious enough to join us today, and I'm going to turn it over to Sharon. And I think one of the first things that might be helpful for all of us is for Sharon to show us how to access what's going on with this graph. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon.
Okay, so here goes. Um, there we go. I think everyone's got what's going on with this graph, international optimism. Which was the graph that we had 2 weeks ago. And when the Times said they wanted me to go from once a month to every week, I said, I don't know if there are enough really good graphs, but boy, we've certainly had our share. And this was a great graph that appeared in January of this year, and we just used it. Okay, and I'm going to bring it up here. And so for what's going on this graph, on Fridays in the morning, we release the graph. Okay, so this is what you get on Fridays. Not to be moderated until Wednesday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So um, every time we ask the students the same 4 questions, really simple. So we start off with Annie Fetter's, what do you notice? What do you wonder? Followed by, how does this relate to you and your community? And then give us a catchy headline. After all, this is a newspaper. And we like to see some creativity in headline. But to be honest, if you can do a short and clever headline, then chances are you understand the main idea of the graph. And that's really why we do it. So I'm going to go to a bigger example of the same graph. So this is the one you saw before. And I'd like you to put in the chat, what do you notice in this graph? So just put in whatever you got. Chris is going to read a couple of them off as we go. So if you could, please. Chris, I can actually read them, so I can, so let me do
Okay.
it. Most of the points appear above the regression line. Let's keep going. No one else? You don't notice anything? Let's keep going. It's
I have to
positive, fairly
apologize.
strong.
I have to apologize. I'm driving home. So once I get home from work, I will
That's
participate a little
that's
bit better.
fine. That's fine. That's fine. Youngsters are more optimistic than oldsters. And so as a moderator, I'd ask you how you know that, but we won't put that in here. Okay, keep going. What else do you notice? Hey, Chris and Rebecca, it's not cheating. You can do this too. Indonesia's an outlier? What's going on in Indonesia? What do we see and what do we notice in Indonesia? It's, what makes it an outlier? What else do we notice? So we noticed within a country, younger people seem to be more optimistic than older. Then among countries, we noticed that Indonesia is an outlier from some reason. Hey, what's going on in Brazil? Anyone want to tell us what's going on in Brazil? I wonder what's going on in Brazil. US and Japan seem to be furthest away from the line. I wonder what that means. What does that mean? In the real world. Not that the vertical distance is longer, which we could talk about. What's going on in Indonesia? What's going on? I wonder what's going on in Brazil. Why are the US and Japan furthest away from the line? And Rebecca, why are you curious about Morocco, India, and Nigeria? I wonder why she's curious about those three. What about them that makes you curious? Anything else anyone want to put in? So Chris is reminding me that I didn't show you how I got to this. I wonder, of the 21,000 people that were surveyed by telephone, how many were in each group? So it does say below there are 21 countries, and there are 21,000 people that are surveyed by telephone. And we'll talk about that as well. But that's a good wonder what's going on there. Furthest away from the line indicates discouragement at your age. Okay, that's I love that because it applies for both of them. Above the line, the adults are more discouraged, and below the line, the kids are more discouraged. Okay. So there we go. We've got a bunch of noticings and wonderings. And notice I was changing some of your noticings into wonderings because the next question we'll ask is about wondering. Before we do that, though, let me back up completely because I didn't do this, which is to get to the website. Just don't type in anything other than what's going on in this graph. Yes, there are other ways to get there. There you go. Click on it. This is the web page for it. Here's the graph that was discussed last week. The one we took a week off for President's Day, so the one that's going to be discussed on March 2nd has yet to appear, but it would appear up here when we got it. On the side, we've got a couple teachers' resources. There are actually some below. 3.5 minutes on how to use what's going on with this graph, which is great if you're going to give to a colleague. 3.5 minutes, it tells you everything. Okay, a bunch of graphs on inequality, a bunch of graphs that are just really good ones, and then here we are down here. So this was 2 weeks ago, and they're in reverse chronological order. Okay, so you can just kind of go back and see them. Just keeps going. 5 years of graphs, 120 graphs. Okay, so we're back to where we really were before.
Sharon,
yes?
Sharon, there was one more comment put in the chat. Why does it seem like young people are more optimistic than older people?
Yeah. So I wonder, that would be I wonder.
Mm-hmm.
So the best practices of using this is when students talk to each other. So you can imagine you would have that question, students would have ideas. Why are young people more optimistic? But then getting to Rebecca's comment, oh, but Rebecca said in India, Nigeria, and Morocco, older people are more. Now, is it by a lot? Not much, but maybe 1,000 people were interviewed in each country. So that's a pretty good sample. And if I told you that it was a random sample, that would even be better, which we can talk about later. Okay. Anyway, so we ask those questions, and students have the ability to respond online. Now, they can respond online as soon as the graph gets put on Friday. And we always have a couple students that want to be the first one on. And I can tell you my secret. If you're the first one on, I guarantee you that I will moderate your response. I will reply to it. But anyway, so we've had 334 students who've responded. And I'm going to click on this. This is what your students will do. Move these out of the way so I can see. Okay. And this comes up and it says share your thoughts. Okay, so if the students have never been on, they have to register, and the registration is nothing more than a name and a place. So you can say Chris from Georgia if that's all you want to say. Okay, and if you get a shout out on your headline, then we remove last names and any other identifications. But you can say, you know, whatever you want for the name. And yes, you know, we get things like, you know, the Wizard of Oz, okay, kind of stuff. Note that all comments are moderated for civility by the New York Times. So if you put it on, okay, there's going to be a delay while the New York Times actually reads it to make sure that you're not criticizing another student and you're not using swear words and stuff like that. So I will just show you. I just want to go fast. So this is a test. I'm putting in a comment. And there's a box underneath that you can check called email me when my comment is published. That gives you a link that has two advantages. One for you as a teacher, which is you can say to students, you know, put your response in, send me your links so I can read it, because you certainly don't want to go through 334. So that's one reason. That's kind of like the stick part. The carrot part is that if you check that off, and if a moderator responds to you, or we now have loads of students who respond to each other, you can go to your response and you can see that there were two other students that responded to you and one of the moderators responded to you. Otherwise, you'd have to go through all 334 of them to find it. Okay, so all you do is you hit submit and you're done. Okay, and it'll get published soon thereafter. So as I said, moderators as well as other students respond. I did this just yesterday morning because I wanted to have some response. But here we have a response from Illinois of a student, and I responded to them. And it's usually taking them to the next level. So wherever they are, we go to the next level. Sometimes it's actually to give them links. Now, you're going to hear that the day after we moderate, on Thursday, we share with you the free link to the article that this relates to. And we share links to any other articles in the New York Times that we refer to. Okay, but sometimes we'll refer to for example, the report itself. And that will definitely come on Thursday, but I'll sometimes put it right in here so the students can go to it directly. So I say to them, you notice the response to whether the world was getting better varies depending on how wealthy or developed the country is. Why do you think this is the case? Are there exceptions to this conjecture? Okay. So making them think, not necessarily statistically, but at least interpreting the graph based on the comment that they made. Let's go backwards. Most of these appeared, the ones we are seeing right now. So you can look at them in both. This is newest to oldest, and you can also look at from oldest to newest. But let's just go back a whole bunch, and you'll see, okay, that here's Ziona from Nick Studley's class. I forgot where that is. Finally, there's my response, and then Elizabeth from New Jersey, and then one of her classmates. Okay, so that would be really great. And, you know, I do not know, it's just kind of like when a teacher corrects a paper, you know, you can put the grade on the top, B+. Does a student ever read any of your comments you spent hours writing? We don't know. Sometimes we suspect not. Okay, but this way you can at least see what even your peers are saying about your comment. Okay. So that's how you get to the site, and that's what you're going to see on Friday when we publish. There's some other things about rules that if the kids are 13 or under, then the class can respond rather than individuals, and we have some of those as well. And that's that. Okay.
So Sharon, what would you say are kind of the basics and nuts and bolts that teachers need to know about what's going on with this graph?
The first one is it's budget friendly and it's teacher friendly. So budget friendly is everything is free. Okay, you don't have to use up your 10 articles a month. Okay, and it's free for the students too, because if they come in through what's going on in this graph, anyone who comes in through that, it's free. Okay, so that's the first thing. The teacher friendly is a couple things. First of all, every single week, the format is the same. You know where you can find stuff. And I write it as if I'm writing it for a humanities teacher. I'm not writing it for a math teacher or a statistics teacher. I want the teachers to understand. And I will tell you that I have heard that some teachers actually give the entire, you'll see the release and the reveal in a second, they give it directly to students and the students read it. So it's written as if you don't have to have that background. If you have that background, that's all the better. So for teachers, it's consistent week to week, and it's really concise. So let me show you what's in the reveal. The reveal appears the day after we moderate. So in a way, the students and you have had almost a week to look at it. You can decide to assign it as homework on the weekend. You can assign it, you can use it on a Monday. You can have students reply on Wednesdays. You have all kinds of options. And then on Thursday, the reveal comes out. Now, having said that, it's not like the answer's in the reveal and you can't use it again. Because one of the things I say is, if you don't like a graph on a particular week, it's too hard, you don't like the content, it doesn't relate to what you're doing in the class, couple things. You can go into the indices, and I'll show you where that is, and you can find something else. But the other thing is, I can guarantee you the next week it's going to be completely different. If it was a hard one, so March 2nd is an extremly hard graph. It is probably the hardest graph we've ever had. I'm going to tell you that March 9th will be very easy. Okay, so here goes. So here's the reveal. The first thing we do is we give you the link. So this is the link to the article. Okay, here's the article. And the graph is, it's coming. It's not that one. There's more than one. There it is. Okay. I will tell you this is usually true. Most of the noticings and wonderings that you get out of the graph, including most of the noticings, aren't actually written about in the article. If you look at this graph, you will know more about this content than what's in the article, because the article is about a lot of other things too. Okay, so there you go. That's the article, and then I link you to the original study. It happens this study is they give you a part where you can actually take the survey with the 31 questions that were asked of the 21,000 people. Okay, which is really cool to be able to do in the classroom. But you can go to the survey itself, and one of the most interesting parts of this particular survey, which was done by UNICEF and Gallup, it supposedly is the first time that an international survey has been done of the youth of the world, is by country, 21 countries. They tell you how they did this stratified random sample. And let's not make it too easy. It's different in different countries. Okay, and part of course, of doing a stratified random sample when you're doing different countries, realize the diversity of those countries, is there's a lot of weighting going on. So they talk about the weightings. Okay, so we talk about this survey and what they come up with. Okay, we always have a shout out of about 5 headlines that come in by the time we close the gates at 2 o'clock on Wednesday. And we'll publish them here. And we know that kids absolutely love having a shout out for their headlines. We actually know it's fairly competitive within classrooms who gets a shout out. But we give their headlines. So here, the opposing futures in the eyes of different generations from Wisconsin and the ages of optimism from Wisconsin. Is each generation making the world better from New Jersey? And Generation Battle, is the world getting better or is it getting worse? So in general, the headlines have to relate to the graph and there has to be evidence in the graph. Okay? It has to be short and it has to be clever. So that's how a headline gets done. So those are always there. Then I have, maybe you would like to think about these additional questions. When I did this in my own classroom for 20 years before the New York Times started doing it, these would be the kinds of questions I would ask students. So they go from the mathematical and statistical, for example, where do you see youth and parents that have the same level of optimism? Where do you see youth having more optimism than parents, parents more than on? And that, of course, would be above, below, and on the y equals x line. Okay, oh my goodness, y equals x line. What's that? I'm a humanities teacher. Okay, so actually the next question is about that too. Let's go down to the stat nuggets, which are right here. So stat nuggets are statistical and mathematical terms that are used in the graph. And we have two parts. So here's the y equals x, okay? The first paragraph is always a layman's definition of the statistical or mathematical term. Okay, so there it is. Y equals x line is defined by all the ordered pairs in which the y value is equal to the x value, such as, I think that would be helpful if you didn't know what an ordered pair was, and there are some examples. And then the second paragraph is where you see it in the graph. Okay, so we talk about above and below the line. So there's three stat nuggets in this graph: scatter plot, y equals x line, and stratified random sample. So that was in the additional question. We also have something here which is a little different than other places, but here's two graphs that appeared in that article. And they both have to do with, is the world getting better or not? And notice this one's a scatter plot, okay, and over here, this one is a segmented bar graph. So what's the difference in the questions? How do these two graphs relate to each other? So this is getting a little bit further along. And then lastly, I ask you to go into the study and look at any one graph there, and there's a couple dozen, okay? And what do you notice and what do you wonder? And there are all kinds of graphs. Sometimes we'll ask you to interview people in your neighborhood. Okay, so that's another thing. So these are the components that you're going to get on Thursday. You're going to get the links, a little summary, the headlines, additional questions, and stat nuggets. And that appears every single week. So you can see that if you actually assign this to a student, and have different students get assigned different graphs kind of thing, how much they could learn about a graph beyond what they're going to learn in the 10 minutes to classroom period that you may spend on this. Okay, you really get a lot more insight. So that's what you're going to expect to see. You've seen everything now. You've seen everything except the indices. Do you want to see the indices?
So Sharon, I might interject. Rosalie put in the chat box that in economics, they use the term the 45-degree line instead of y equal to x.
Great.
And
Great.
Holly Lynn also commented, she asked the question about, you refer people to the original article, and would it be possible maybe for us to think about adding a component where you take the original data and have that available for the students, maybe where they could use that in CODAP?
Dream on. This is the most asked question, and what we got is what we got. So I spend the time to find where the original information came from. There are a few times that the Times actually develops it themselves, and that includes the graph that's going to be March 2nd, okay? But usually it comes from another study. So I'll find the study and I'll see if I can get to the original data, and that happens very, very infrequently. It just is not there. And occasionally I get to talk to the journalists who write the articles, and the answer is no. So they work off, studies that they find elsewhere, and what you get is what you get.
So Sharon, what kind of advice would you give teachers for how they can select graphs for their classroom? You've spoken about how some graphs may not be very engaging for students, but if you had to help teachers say, how would you go about with the multitude of graphs that we now have on the site, how would they think about selecting a graph for their classes?
So here goes. Okay, let's see. We're gonna go backwards to the website. Okay, so pretty simple way is you could kind of like look at these and go, oh yeah, like I'm using a stacked bar graph. I'd like to do the stacked bar graph one. There it is. So you just click on it. Okay, that's a stacked bar graph. You can talk about a lot of things with that stacked bar graph. The other thing you could do is, oh, yeah, I'm a history teacher and I'm interested in that gerrymandering stuff. Up, here's one on voting maps. Maybe I'll go do that one. Okay, there you go. Let's go back again. See what else I can come up with. I'll go, oh, I'm up for doing something funky today. Like we've been doing trigonometric functions and it's like they're all falling asleep. Why don't we do this graph? There you go. Picture is graph. Okay, we did a whole, what do you notice? What do you wonder? What's going on with this graph? So that's one way to do it. But let's go back to international optimism. Now, at the bottom of every single release, okay, we show here, view our archives to link to all past releases. So we have archives by topic, by graph type, and by stat nugget. Okay, so by topic. Okay, I am a science teacher and I am interested in auto emissions in America. I don't know, I'm just like picking anyone. There we go. Okay, stacked time series, whole graph on it with all the links. Okay, so that would be one thing you could do. You could say, gee, we are studying right now histograms, and I'd like a graph on histograms. Okay, so it's not your imagination. Summers are getting warmer. Okay, now we did make it. So this is an interactive histogram, pretty cool. Okay, and there's a couple other ones. So you could talk about that, okay, because that's the kind of graph that you want to do. Or finally, Okay. My students are having a lot of problems knowing the difference between percentage change and percentage point change. Oh my goodness. So let's go down to math. And percentage, oh, there's percentile. Okay, here's percentage change. Okay, go to this graph. There we go. Foreign-born share of the population is a percentage. Okay, so there's a graph that specifically talks about that. Happens to be a time series, happens to be actually pretty simple. And you can also see where a history teacher probably would be interested in this graph. So that's how you can pick ones, either just, kind of scrolling down in reverse chronological, all the graphs that have been done, which I kind of find is fun, or going to the indices, which I update every month, and looking for graphs that meet your criteria. There's 120 of them now, so it's like you can't really keep them on the top of your head.
So Sharon, this is just amazing what's available at the site and all that you have put into what's going on in this graph. Maybe this is a two-part question. What motivated you to advocate for starting what's going on with this graph? And if you had to say, what do you see as the big overreaching goal of having this for students and teachers? How would you respond?
Okay. I'd like to do the goal first, okay?
Okay.
I think that's really, really important. Okay, so I have a couple criteria of how I pick graphs. The first thing is the students have to somehow see themselves in the graph. And certainly this was, compare yourself to your parents. Like that's an easy one, you can see that. But I really, I find that so many graphs that are in statistics curriculums, like, do the kids really even care? I want something that they think they can see themselves in. And that's why I usually used to think that if I show them a graph that they can see themselves in, that they're going to tell me how it affects them and their community. Well, we found out after 2 years that wasn't working. That's why we added that third question. The second thing is I really want a graph that has a surprise in it. Like, I am really surprised at that US number. And I am really curious about India, Nigeria, and Morocco. And I think I understand Indonesia and Brazil already, okay? But there's something very surprising in there. Why is US and Japan out there? Okay, I want students to learn about the world around them. I taught, it's still hard for me to say, in an inner city school where I am pretty confident that the students had hardly even been out of their neighborhood, forget about being in other parts of Boston. And I want them to be aware of what's going on. So we got a graph right now that we're holding in our pocket. We're not sure whether we're going to use it or not, but it's about the Ukraine. I want kids to know about the Ukraine from a graph, okay? We may or may not end up using that one. And lastly, it's got to be timely. There's no old data. We just throw them out. Okay, so that's how I pick the graphs. Okay, how did I get involved? Well, we all know as teachers we're really influential, and be really careful what you introduce your students to because they may be addicted for life. I had a 6th grade teacher that used to, I don't remember the system, gave us points to do different things like play outside, read a book, read a newspaper. And I started reading a newspaper when I was in 6th grade. And right now, I can't drink a cup of coffee without a newspaper in front of me, preferably 2. And so I used to read the paper and I would see graphs and I'd go, I'm surprised. This relates to me. I am surprised. Cut that one out. Put it under the overhead. I mean, this goes back like 20 years ago. And I would start off classes with saying, asking them about the graph. This was before I knew about Annie Fetter's open-ended, what do you notice, what do you wonder? And I'm telling you, putting that graph in front of the class, the very first thing, I got everybody's attention. that was it. Then we could talk about the trigonometric functions. Okay, so that's where it started. And when the ASA said, let's do something with the New York Times, anyone got any ideas? I said, yeah, a decade ago, I wrote them this letter. I said, you've done the hard part already. You got these great graphs. Why not introduce them to students and use them in classrooms? Okay. And we've had 8,000 responses just this school year. And I asked the Times for traffic numbers, which they do have, and they will not share them. But they said, rest assured, it's 100 to 1. That's a lot of people looking at this. So I will tell you, in my classroom, because I don't have internet, really, I used to make one copy. I would either put it on the overhead or pass it out. And 124 kids, which was my course load, saw that graph. So that's, makes sense. It's 100 to 1.
Do you typically know, typically for a given week, how many students would you say participate in what's going on in this graph?
We get responses, now we're getting responses between 200 and 600 a week. And I'll be darned if I can figure out which graphs are going to have more and which are going to have less. Mm-hmm. I am always wrong. So, and then we have graphs that have been out for a year or two that are still getting responses. Okay. But it's, it's in the vicinity of 300 to 400 a week. And they're coming from all over the world. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of interesting that they kind of come and go. I mean, we had a couple of weeks ago, we got a whole bunch from Hong Kong. And we haven't seen Hong Kong since.
Is it typically mostly high school students, or do you have several middle school students? What seems to be the age range, grade range?
You can tell the middle school because they usually have that issue of 13-year-olds. So it comes from, Mrs. Smith's class, 6th period class. You hear that. They appear to be virtually all from high school. But the New York Times has done 3 webinars on what's going on with this graph. And for one of them, they asked, what level do you teach? Okay. And more than half of those that responded said college level. Now, I don't get any responses from the college level. But that's who was at the webinar. So maybe they're using it. I don't know.
I know that Sharon would be very interested in knowing if people that are on the chat are using what's going on with this graph, and maybe anything that you could share with us about your experiences with what's going on with this graph.
Christine, I'm going to go off and get that link. There's the 3.5 minutes of how to.
I just gave the 45-minute webinar in the
okay,
chat.
there it is. Okay,
and I'll put the intro in as well.
Yeah, that one is phenomenal, and one of the reasons it's phenomenal is you have a computer science teacher from New York and a algebra teacher middle school from Arizona. And they talk about how they use it, and it's very, very different. Thank you for putting them on Desmos. We had a 6-month collaboration with Desmos, which worked out terrifically, but the Times has issues with sharing their materials with others. So we don't do it anymore, but I'm glad you do.
See, Amy, it looks like you said that you could share how you use these graphs in your class.
Hey, everybody. I've only done this a couple of times, I think, live. I actually tend to do this more like in the past, kind of like what Sharon was saying. And what I like about it is, I think what Sharon was saying, they're interesting graphs, but it's a blank slate for what you would want to do with it. So you can go as shallow or as deep as you would want to with your group of kids. And it's a discussion starter. I mean, that's really what it is here, is that you're thinking about having the kids engage with something, and you never know where it's going to go. I can imagine all different directions, and ones that ones you can imagine and ones you can't imagine. For that, it's always very interesting. And for me, what I like about it is, with most, stats activities that are good, it's contextual. So, you're not just talking about the math behind it or the graph behind it. You're talking about what the story is being told. And that's, I think, an important aspect of this is trying to figure out how you're getting kids to interact with the story, not just the graph itself. So in that sense, it's very interdisciplinary. I mean, you saw the topics. You could do, anything from, weather to science to current events, social justice issues. All of those things can be really nice to have discussions about, but then you can also do specific types of graphs. So if you're trying to find examples of a specific type of story and how it's being told. A couple of practical advice, I think that, the webinar is very good for that. And so if you haven't done the webinar and you are interested, I would say just do it. Because I thought that it was nice as a teacher to see how other people are using it in very specific ways. But I think the thing about that I would suggest is to have a discussion first. So it doesn't have to be a verbal discussion, because I can imagine in an online environment, you could have a discussion as well, or assigning as a homework and having kids process first. And then if you want to have kids write comments, I know Sharon said that it was for middle school, but I would recommend avoiding names, especially if they don't have permission from parents, because they are minors. So I do things like, Miss Hogan's first period, even though my students are older. I just find that more comfortable. And so it could be a group of kids that come up with one comment, and then having them, think about what they think is important to write down. And it's great because it could be 1 to 2 sentences. It could be, what they thought at the moment. And sometimes we talk about those comments before students start to enter them in. And yes, I think they do read their comments, Sharon, because they've told me that they like that they're getting acknowledged. So that's all I can think of, other than I think it's a nice, shift from just like doing a problem in a book or reading an article and talking about it. So thank you.
I can guarantee you that if you do it in class where you talk about it, not just like read it, but if you talk about it, it doesn't have to be more than 5 minutes. The students will be thinking about it after they leave. There's going to be something there they're thinking about. And, isn't that what it's all about? We don't have to have all the answers. We just need to get them started. And I love a comment that was 2 years ago at the end of a year. There's a history teacher in New Jersey that has his students do it every single week, and they've done it every single week for 5 years. And I said to him, why do you do this? You're a history teacher, you're not a math teacher. He said, because I'm teaching my students claim and evidence. And I feel that this is the best way to do it. So the end of about 2 years ago, the last graph was a scatter plot on baseball, and it was contract salaries were on the x-axis, and a statistic called WAR, which we define for you, is basically how good you are, how much better you are than a rookie. Okay, it's a number that measures that. And the student starts off saying, I hate baseball. I don't know anything about baseball, but this is what this graph is about. And I'm going, we hit a home run there. we got someone interested in something that they really were not familiar with, and they were willing to tackle it. And I often compare understanding graphs to understanding poetry. So you're asking the wrong person to interpret poetry as being a math teacher, but how do you teach someone to understand a poem? I don't know. You just got to read a whole bunch of them, and eventually you figure out how to understand a poem. And I think for the kinds of graphs we're talking about, getting beyond the typical textbook graph, you have to have a lot of practice. And you don't really have to know the names of everything, but you understand what's going on. That's the key. And it's that practice that he was giving his students every single week that made it that she could look at this graph and know what was going on.
Sharon, I'm curious, is there one particular graph out of the 120 graphs that stands out to you? Or maybe another way to phrase it is there one that seems to have been very, very popular with the students? So maybe those are two different questions.
So, the popular students is it popular students are popular with the teachers that the teachers bring them to it? I'll tell you, let's see if I can get it fast. And if I can't get it fast, I'll just tell you what it is. Yeah, 1 second. So if you got to click on this again. Let's see if I can go. Nope. 1 second. I've got to do this again. There we go. I'll find it because I know what it looks like. So this was a graph that I was absolutely positive we would get a very small response, but I really liked the graph, so I just decided we're going to do it anyway. There we go, this one. Okay, so what is this graph? I will tell you quickly. It is the military budgets of countries around the world. And the surprise is that Saudi Arabia over here, which I don't think has a whole lot of people, has got a really big military budget. And look at Russia over here, despite what's going on right now in comparison to us. And I guess we got a really big one. And I'm feeling that the reason we had 509 responses remember, this is 2019, this is 3 years ago, we were getting like 100 responses a week back then. Why did we get 509? Because I think a couple teachers looked at this and said, we spend $596 billion on our military and I don't have copy paper. I think that's what was probably going on. So we got an awful lot of responses, but we got a lot of responses from around the world as well. And this is called a bubble graph, and it's an interesting one. It's a bubble map graph. Okay? If you notice, this is like North America, South America. There's China and Japan over there. People wonder what this is over here. If you go to the graph, it's interactive, so all the other bubbles light up with the name of the country and the amount. Okay? And so the responses here were amazing. And I think people thought about it afterwards. So is it my favorite graph? No. But it certainly did the job, didn't it?
I think what's really nice about what's going on with this graph is that it started in a very young age. Teachers can expose students to visualizations that are not the typical visualizations that we've seen in our statistics courses. And this whole idea of data science can really be brought to the school level through so many of these graphs. And the fact that large data sets are being used, and it's just these graphs are wonderful.
Here's one that a lot of middle school students respond. This was last week, okay? We did it for Valentine's Day. weddings in the United States by year. Like this is yawn, like, you know, this is a time series. Yeah, it went down during COVID. It went up after COVID. Okay. Okay. The discussion about these, they called them blocks rather than steps. Okay. So they discussion about blocks. They had discussions about why the y-axis didn't start at 0. Okay. And look at our questions. So how has the pandemic affected the wedding business? Okay, so the graph is not that interesting. What's the relationship between weddings and business? Okay, so you know, really simple. And I had great confidence in this graph because I once went to a classroom and I asked the students what their favorite graph was this year, and they told me it was the engagement ring one. Like 14-year-olds are interested in engagement rings. This is the engagement rings. It was by how much is spent on engagement rings by your income. But so this one was definitely popular with younger students. You know, not exactly my favorite graph, though we've never had a step time series. We've only had one other step graph.
I really like how the graphs have the students thinking multivariately, which is something that, you know, is being promoted that we should be doing more of starting at the middle school level. And these graphs, I think, really help students to think as multivariate thinkers instead of just univariate or bivariate.
Yeah, so that's kind of an unspoken criteria of mine, which is there has to be a comparison that's meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we didn't talk about this too much. So we're comparing within a country, younger and older, between countries, more optimistic, less optimistic. But we had a whole bunch of students that went after, are democracies happier or not as happy? So subgroup, okay? Are less developed countries happier or not happier? Now, the headline for the article, I don't know if anyone caught that. Here it is. Where are young people most optimistic in poorer countries? So another variable. Now, could they have made this graph where the color of the dots had to do with per capita income? I don't know, there's probably a way to do for democracies and not democracies too. And that wouldn't have been that hard to do. Sometimes the graphs are like on steroids, like they've got so much in it, it's really hard to absorb it. And I'd actually prefer to have a graph with less and say, what can we add?
Mm-hmm.
I also sometimes ask them if they could redraw this graph. So as paired bar graphs. Okay, where the bars would be for each country, children, adults. And which graph do you like better? Which better tells the story? That's another one that I will often do if there's another kind of graph that can go with it.
I think it would be an interesting exercise to have students think about the data in more detail that's behind how the graph was constructed, and maybe ask students if they could, in their mind, reconstruct what the data set looked like that this graph was created from.
And then going to the simple, how about interviewing people in your neighborhood, a kid and a parent, and asking about, is the world getting better? See if there's a different answer. Then combining all the data from all the kids in the class. And this kind of starts being a really interesting project. And then you can read how Gallup does it by country. We've only scratched the surface here. Wait till if you go read the report, it just raises more questions. The report was very, very good and very well explained.
Well, we're getting close to time to end the chat. Is there any last minute questions of Sharon before we close?
I have a last minute question of them, but
All right, that sounds good. We'll let Sharon
so now
ask.
that you sat through this webinar, you are absolutely qualified to become a moderator. And if you'd like to become a moderator, please contact me. We've got almost 50 moderators now from about 3/4 of the states and 2 foreign countries. And it's 2.5 hours once a year, a little editing for which you get a byline and a $50 stipend from the New York Times.
Sharon, I'm going to put your email here in the chat if that's okay.
Yep, that's fine.
It really is fun to moderate. It's just interesting to be sitting there and just see the comments come in from the students, and you sit there and you think, wow, I never thought about looking at it that way, and then thinking about what your own response would be.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting.
We might be sure to mention, in case we haven't already, the what's going on this graph, the live interaction with the moderator is on Wednesdays.
Yep.
Each week. I think starting at 9 p.m. Eastern
9
time.
a.m. I do the 9
a.m.
to 11:30, and the co-moderator does 11:30 to 2
in the afternoon.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the one from Hawaii had to get up really early.
Well, Sharon, thank you so very much for joining us. This has been wonderful, and we are all very grateful to you for getting this started and your dedication to it week after week after week.
Well, you can just thank Mr. Hedrick from 6th grade in Hartford, Connecticut.
That's right, for having you read a newspaper. That's correct. So next month, we'll be sending out a notice, but Chris Weil from New Zealand is going to join us in March, and he's going to talk about using census at school and the open source software Insight. So I think next month we'll learn about another great resource that teachers can access free, and Chris Wild is just wonderful. So that will be in March.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for joining us.
And we'll see you.
If you'd like to be a moderator.
Yes, Sharon loves moderators.
Well, I really love spreading it across the country. I really do have an objective of all 50 states. So
yes, I think that's good.
I'm up to 27.
It's great. All right. We will see you all next month.
Okay.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Thank you.